Back when circus tents ruled the roadside and sideshows drew bigger crowds than the main event, freak shows were considered perfectly normal entertainment. You'd walk past a banner promising the lizard man or the bearded lady, and chances are you'd stop, stare, and pay. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a spectacle, and it thrived on making people feel scared, amazed, or shocked. In today's video, we look at the 15 circus monsters you won't believe existed. Number 15. Hugh Bailey. Well, life is a beautiful gift from God, but not everyone is handed the same shape of it. Hugh Bailey, born in 1935, came into the world with twisted, contorted limbs that bent in ways no one expected. Some called him the Pretzel Man, others Spider Boy or Crawfish Boy. None of those names ever quite captured the man behind them. He grew up in an age when difference meant display, yet Hugh made a career from the very thing that once brought him stares. He performed in traveling sideshows and later appeared in the cult film The Mutations, where his resilience left a stronger impression than the script ever could. His body may have looked unusual, but it carried grace. Every motion deliberate, practiced, dignified. Records fade after that. Some say he retired quietly, others that he kept performing. What's certain is this: Hugh Bailey's story was never about deformity. It was about endurance and the will to keep moving anyway. Number 14. Cissy Cook. Cissy Cook was born as Nanny Mae Hill back in the days of 1901. She lived without arms but with absolute command of her feet. She was known as the Armless Wonder and the Penguin Girl, and had only short stubs for arms and 3 toes on each foot. But those toes could do more than most hands. On stage, she sewed, crocheted, embroidered, and even fed herself, her precision mesmerizing every audience. Married to Ben Hill, who passed in 1967, Cissy spent decades touring the sideshow circuit, often driving herself around in a small golf cart between performances. Off-stage, she was known for her sharp wit and independence. She refused pity, preferring to laugh off questions about her condition. When she died in 1973, friends remembered her not for her missing limbs, but for her confidence, unshaken and real. She may still have family living in Texas, but her legend travels further. Cissy Cook didn't just live without arms. She lived without apology, and that's what endured. Now let's head over to number 13. Lazarus, Colorado, and Joannes, Colorado. In the 1600s, Lazarus and Joannes Baptista didn't dance, sing, or speak. They just stood there, and people couldn't look away. Lazarus lived a normal life, walked on his own, and made decisions. But Joannes couldn't do any of that. He was a half-formed body growing from Lazarus's chest without voice, movement, or thoughts. But if someone poked his chest, Joannes would twitch. That alone packed crowds. There was no act, no routine, just 2 brothers who never had a choice. Freak shows weren't a thing yet, but the Colorado twins opened that door, whether they meant to or not. They made money by letting people stare. Maybe it was survival, maybe it was resignation, but it worked. There's no soft story here, just 2 lives tangled into one, trying to exist while the world gawked. One moved, one twitched. That was enough to turn them into a career, and that career helped shape the next 300 years of sideshow history. Number 12. The world's tallest Santa. Jakob Nacken didn't hide from crowds. He towered over them. At 8 feet 1 inch, he was called the tallest man alive and toured Europe as Uranus. It worked until the war. Drafted into the German army, Jakob was captured by Allied forces in 1944. The press gave him a new label, the world's largest Nazi. Headlines stuck, but Jakob wasn't a villain. He came back to America after the war, put on a red suit, and spent the next 2 decades towering over kids as the world's tallest Santa. He was not a gimmick, but a giant who used what he had to make people smile. He worked in parades, circuses, and Ripley's, quietly and without ego. Those who met him remembered him not for his size, but for how decent he was. He didn't want pity or applause, just a job that let him be seen without being judged. He died at 81, not as a Nazi or freak, just Jakob. Number 11. Rudolf Ivanovich and Heinrich Haag. Rudolf didn't wear a costume. His body was the costume. Thick, wild hair wrapped around his chest and back like an animal hide. They called him the Wild Man of Siberia and tossed him in cages. He'd crouch, growl, and tear at raw meat. People believed it. Not because it was real, but because he sold it like it was. Heinrich Haag went the other way. No growls. Just skin. Loose, stretchy, alien. He'd pull it 7 inches off his torso and flap it like wings. The India Rubber Man, they said. It wasn't medical, and it wasn't magic. It was business. They weren't victims, and they weren't heroes. They were men who got paid to turn their bodies into acts. When doctors offered shame, they offered spectacle. When people stared, they charged admission. No one owned them. No one pitied them. They worked the stage, took the money, and walked off when they wanted. They weren't freaks. They were freelancers with weird skin. Number 10, pickled punks. The name sounds like a joke, but it wasn't. Pickled punks were dead babies in jars, fetuses, miscarriages, stillborns, preserved in formaldehyde and lined up on carnival shelves like props. Sometimes real, sometimes wax. Always grim. King Frederick III of Denmark supposedly started the trend in the 1600s. Ulisse Aldrovandi, a naturalist, took it even further. His collection hit 18,000 preserved specimens, and sideshows loved it. No one clapped. They stared, held their breath, and moved on. It wasn't entertainment. It was morbid curiosity bottled and sold. Most people didn't want to believe they were real. Some clearly were. Others were fakes made to look worse than reality. Either way, they worked. They brought in ticket money. People looked, whispered, and left disturbed. That's what the carnivals wanted. It wasn't science. It wasn't medicine. It was show business, and those floating bodies were just part of the act. Call it grotesque, call it wrong, but for hundreds of years, jars like these drew bigger crowds than any performer ever did. Number 9. Frida Pushnik. When Frida Pushnik was carried out on a velvet pillow in the 1930s, most people didn't know how to react. She had no arms, no legs, just a small stump on her side. But what shut people up wasn't the body. It was how she moved, calm, focused, like she didn't need your permission. She taught herself how to eat, type, sew, and apply makeup with 0 limbs. At just 10, she performed at Ripley's Believe It or Not Auditorium at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. She joined Ringling Brothers in 1943 and toured the country. Her sister Irma, once a trapeze artist, worked behind the scenes. Frida walked away from the spotlight in 1956, but popped back up in cult horror flicks like House of the Damned and Sideshow. She didn't ask for sympathy, didn't act tough, just lived her life in a way most couldn't. She didn't prove anything to the world. She didn't need to. Her life was already proof enough. All right, now, let's move to Number 8. The Oklahoma Outlaw Mannequin Mummy. Elmer McCurdy was a bad outlaw, drunk, sloppy, and terrible at robbery. In 1911, after a failed train heist, he was shot dead by lawmen. That should have been the end. But the mortician embalmed him so well, he dried up like leather. McCurdy stood on display in a funeral home for 5 years. Then a carnival man faked a family claim and hauled the body on tour as the Oklahoma Outlaw. For the next 6 decades, Elmer's corpse traveled through sideshows, wax museums, and even amusement parks. People thought he was a mannequin. Then in 1976, while filming an episode of The $6 Million Man, a crew member accidentally snapped his arm off, revealing bone. Cops found a ticket stub in his mouth and traced it back. In 1977, after 66 years of traveling as a prop, Elmer McCurdy was finally buried. His grave was sealed with concrete. No one wanted him ending up on tour again. Death took him once. The show took him longer. Number 7. Joe the Leopard Boy. He didn't roar or growl. He just stood there, skin broken up in pale blotches that looked like animal spots. His name was A.E. Bishel, born in 1869. A black man with leukoderma, a condition that left his skin patchy with pigment loss. Barnum turned him into Joe the Leopard Boy, dressed him in furs, and locked him in a cage. That was the act. He walked out, stood still, and let people gawk. They never asked his name. They didn't care. Dime museums swallowed his face and spat out the label. Somewhere along the way, he disappeared. A short note in 1909 says he fell through a trap door and died. He was 40. His skin was what gave him work, but it never gave him freedom. No interviews, no last words, no photos of the real man. Just a name in a lineup of curiosities. He died doing the job, and the job never asked who he really was. Number 6. The White and Black Twins. Helen Ann and Henry Sedham Walker were twins, born in 1856 to black parents in the middle of a divided America. Helen had albinism. Henry didn't. That was enough to make them a traveling exhibit. Labeled the White and Black Twins, they were shown off from St. Louis to New Orleans. Their skin color was the act. Newspapers sold it, museums displayed it. No tricks, no gimmicks. Just two children held up as proof that nature could still surprise. Census records later show them living with their mother in New York. By the 1870s, Henry's trail fades. One note lists him as a doorman in Pittsburgh. Helen kept going. Married 3 times. Her last husband, Charles Price, was an albino too. Years later, their descendants found their graves and gave them names again. The world used their image, but the story didn't end there. Someone remembered. Someone cared. That's more than most sideshow performers ever got. Number 5, The Last Tattooed Lady. Laurette Fulkerson, born Loretta Love in 1915, didn't wait for society to get comfortable. She inked her body when most women were taught to cover their ankles. By the time she joined Ringling Brothers, nearly her entire body was tattooed. This wasn't a rebellion. It was income. Her skin was the stage. Under the name The Tattooed Lady, she toured non-stop. Hubert's Museum, Hall and Christ, you name it. Long after others quit, she kept going. Tattoos stopped shocking people, but she didn't stop working. The sideshow world shrank, but she stayed in it, right into the early 1990s. Her body was filled with color, lines, names, images, and none of them were soft. She didn't follow trends. She didn't care what was in. She did what paid the bills. Laurette died in 2007 at 92. They called her the last of her kind. Not because she was covered in ink, but because she never apologized for it, and she never asked anyone to understand. Number 4, Willie Popeye Ingram. Well, this was my guy. I mean, he was so cool. Willie Ingram never had the option to blend in. Born in Decatur in the 1930s, his eyes could bulge nearly an inch from their sockets by the time he was 4. It wasn't a trick. It hurt. It disturbed people. But it got their attention. So he used it. Willie joined Walter L. Wanis and Sons' traveling sideshow and spent years moving from backroads fairs to larger carnivals. Some laughed. Some turned away. Some stared like they couldn't believe it. Willie didn't flinch. He made it into Ripley's Believe It or Not, appeared in tabloids, and even got a small part in The Freakmaker, a cult horror film from 1974. But behind the camera flashes was a man just trying to exist on his own terms. His condition didn't define him, but it gave him space to be seen. Willie didn't fake anything. He just walked into the spotlight and forced people to face what they usually ignored. That was the real act. Number 3. Carrie Akers. Carrie Akers didn't care if you looked. She was 3 feet tall and weighed over 300 pounds, but it wasn't her body that made people remember her. It was her voice, loud, unapologetic. She joined P.T. Barnum's Circus in the late 1880s, billed as the Fat Dwarf Lady. But Carrie didn't play polite. She shouted when she wanted. She talked back. That didn't sit well with handlers used to quiet acts. So they tried to humiliate her with a name, the Warthog. Not because of her looks, because of her refusal to obey. Carrie didn't last long in the ring, but her impact did. She didn't perform for pity or applause. She wanted something nobody thought she'd ask for: respect. In a world where women, especially in sideshows, were expected to smile and stay silent, Carrie didn't. She roared, and when she walked off that stage, she wasn't forgotten. Not because of what she looked like, because she was the only one who didn't play along. Number 2, the Serpent Girl. They called her Serpentina, the girl with no bones. She'd fold herself like a napkin, twist her spine in half, and collapse her body into shapes that didn't seem possible. Some say her name was Irene Farrell. Others say it wasn't. Doesn't matter. What mattered was what she could do. In the early 1900s, she started performing in places like Oakland's Globe Cafe. She was carried to the stage because she couldn't walk. Once there, she didn't speak. She bent. Her arms twisted backward, her legs curled behind her neck, and the crowd just froze. She toured with the Marine Hippodrome as a Sea Tiny and later joined Ripley's. Her posters promised a woman with no spine. That wasn't true, but the illusion worked. She became a body people couldn't figure out, and that confusion kept them coming. Her name got lost somewhere, but her image didn't. No gimmicks, no voice, just a body that broke the rules. That was enough to leave a mark. Number 1, the Bohemian Twins. Rosa and Josefa Blazek were born conjoined at the lower spine in Bohemia. From childhood, they were put on display. Before they could walk, before they could say no. Doctors said separating them was impossible. So they became performers. They learned violin duets, synchronized posture, and toured Europe before crossing into the U.S. for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. They weren't just staring at, they worked. Rosa gave birth to a son named Franz in 1910. Some said there was no father. Others claimed it was a publicity stunt. Either way, it kept them in the headlines. The sisters returned to America with Franz in 1921 for a vaudeville tour and eventually settled in Chicago. Just a year later, both died from influenza, within minutes of each other. They didn't get to choose the stage, but they stayed there anyway. Not as freaks, not as props. As a pair who lived one life, 2 names, and made sure people never forgot either. Well, that's it for today. We hope you found this video interesting. If you did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.